This is not a sob story, and don't mistake me for someone who has suffered capital T trauma. I represent so many others like myself who know that they have experienced childhood events that affect them decades later and even now. I felt like everything I was trying to improve in my life, like my health, fitness, and relationships, were being anchored down by some sort of invisible weight, and I had no idea why until I finally started to address the underlying anxiousness and especially the negative self-talk that I heard over and over, and I had no idea why it kept coming up. We've tried to downplay how impactful those events are because we see other people like David Goggins, who even I aspire to, who have suffered way more than us. But we realize that the understanding that downplaying these things in effect is doing nothing for us at all, and it kind of even backfires. Part of doing this experiment and learning more from Dr. Andrew Huberman taught me why downplaying the significance of these things is probably one of the most disrespectful things that you can do to yourself. When you tell yourself that other people had it so much worse and you label yourself as pathetic for still dealing with such a thing, you just spiral yourself into self-hate, which does nothing for you and actually robs you of the chance to address the issue properly. Instead of just working through the issue directly, you let it fester, like a spot of mold in the corner of the room that you naively ignore, hoping that it won't grow larger and larger until it suffocates you from the inside out. I'm in no way a neuroscientist, I just wanted to feel better about myself. And I never really understood it until I finished the 4 weeks of the journaling protocol that I'll let Andrew Huberman explain.
I want to emphasize that today's discussion is not a general discussion about the value of journaling. Rather, it is a discussion about a particular form of journaling that the scientific peer-reviewed data says is especially powerful for improving our mental and physical health. It is supported by over 200 peer-reviewed studies. This practice should easily be placed among some of the other critical, so-called foundational pillar practices in terms of its impact on improving mental and physical health, including things like lowering anxiety, improving sleep, improving immunity to things like colds, flus, etc., as well as reducing the symptoms of autoimmune disorders. The particular journaling method and protocol that I will describe has also been shown to improve various metrics of everyday living, including improved memory, decision-making, and on and on and on.
Even though I had a lot of skepticism, I trusted Huberman because he is not the type to just give trendy advice because it sounds good on a YouTube video. No, he looks for science-backed, and in this case, peer-reviewed study that proves the efficacy of the impacts, the amazing impacts on both mental and physical health that come with this journaling practice, something so simple.
Okay, so the first key instruction is that they take a moment to think about what is the most difficult, perhaps even traumatic experience of their entire life. The second instruction was that they were supposed to write for 15 to 30 minutes. And the third instruction was that they were supposed to write for the entire time, that at no point would they take a pause unless somehow emotionally or physically they were unable to keep moving their hand on the paper. In fact, they were told to not pay attention to accurate grammar, to not pay attention to rereadability. What was most important is that they tap into a particularly negatively charged memory of their prior life experience. You write only 1 day per week about the most difficult experience you can recall, and then you write about that same difficult experience 1 week later, and then again 1 week later, and then again 1 week later across the course of a month, or any 4-week period for that matter.
When I first heard about this protocol, I felt extremely skeptical because how could just writing about one of the hardest experiences that you went through in your life change anything? It's not like therapy where you talk to someone and they guide you through the experience of learning something new about what you went through and how to deal with it. No, this is just like wallowing in your own pity of this experience and how it felt and almost reliving all of those same emotions until you spiral down deeper into the darkness. And that's exactly what it felt like when I did this. My problem, even to this day, about hearing life-changing advice from valid and reputable people like Andrew Huberman, like Chris Williamson from the Modern Wisdom podcast, Diary of the CEO with Stephen Bartlett, all these amazing people who tell you how to practically change your life. My biggest problem is following through with the advice that they give. It's like I'm just watching gameplay of how to live an amazing life instead of playing it myself. And so I realized that the only way for things to change, the only way for me to feel better is to change what I'm doing. And if I don't change, how is anything about how I'm feeling going to change? So that's why I started my first day of trauma journaling, and it looked like this.
That's exactly the point of this type of exercise, which is that we are harboring these stories, these experiences, and in some cases, partial recollections, and in another case, detailed recollections of the difficult thing that happened to us, perhaps even the most difficult thing that happened to us. And those narratives exist in our nervous system. These are not necessarily traumas, as we talked about before, although they can be traumas. Now, we hear a lot about trauma, and these days, people call all sorts of things trauma and traumatizing. There's actually a specific definition of trauma that was provided by Dr. Paul Conti, a medical doctor and psychiatrist. He defines trauma as any experience or experiences that modify our brain and neural circuitry such that we do not function as well emotionally, behaviorally, or cognitively going forward from that experience. Not everything constitutes a trauma, but many things do. So applying that definition, most people have some form of trauma stored in their nervous system. And other people perhaps don't have such traumas, but everyone has had stressors.
This is kind of a weird analogy, but as a gamer, it made so much sense to me why doing this made me feel so much better. When I was in my teens playing the hardest game that had ever been released at the time, Demon's Souls, I had to face the hardest boss that I just couldn't overcome. I was frustrated, angry, upset, shouting at the TV and myself for not being good enough at the game to the point where my dad would walk in and remind me that I should be enjoying the game. My blood boiling and me fueling my rage into the controller so bad, I threw it away and gave up. But weeks after not playing one single bit, I ambitiously tried again. And I got a little bit better at dealing with the boss, but I was still frustrated. I was still so angry and upset about myself and the circumstance that I had to overcome, but I knew I was progressing. But in the end, I still couldn't get there. After another 2 weeks of this process, I finally overcame the boss through the cycle of playing the game, getting super frustrated, and just realizing that I'm only getting a little bit better ahead, but then I would put it down, leave it for a week, and then come back stronger somehow. The feeling of tackling and reliving the hardest experience of my life reminded me that I am alive and fine today. Instead of me thinking about the memory as painful as it was in my head to that day, trying to relive those experiences and emotions made me realize that it wasn't as bad as I thought. And also that if I were to go back in time and face that same thing now, I wouldn't have been as affected. The biggest lesson that I got from this is that we have to separate ourselves from our thoughts. And if you take the standard understanding of neuroscience and psychology, it's really confusing as to why that is. But what I've discovered, and a way to intuitively understand this thing, is that the reason why we are so affected by events in our past that kind of dictate how we act now is kind of because we have somewhat of a parent-child relationship with ourselves. It's like our subconscious mind is a child that carries all of the psychological baggage, whether that be good or bad, and we are kind of experiencing the experiences of that kid in ourselves day to day. And our conscious mind kind of has to be like a parent, and that parent can be good or bad because I can tell myself negative things that will affect the child's thoughts, and I can tell myself positive things that will affect the child's thoughts as well. And when I think about it, we are the products of our environment for a reason. It's just like exactly how you would raise a child in a good or a bad environment, and the child would grow to be good or bad, more or less. I've left the link to the full Andrew Huberman episode below on trauma journaling, and if you resonate with the story, you probably know that this is a challenge that you have to face for yourself, that you no longer can ignore. My name is Michael, and I hope to see you again, but more importantly, I hope you design yourself a fulfilling day.